Thanks for clicking enjoy the full story. Buckle up. I, 34M, am the oldest of 3 siblings. My sister Clara, 28F, just got married last month to her longtime boyfriend, Jake, 30M. We've always been close, or at least I thought we were. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Toronto, Clara and I had our sibling spats like anyone else. She was the imaginative one, always staging little plays or building forts in the backyard. I was the pragmatic older brother, fixing her bike when it broke or helping her with math homework. Despite our occasional arguments, like the time she borrowed my prized Game Boy and lost it, we always had each other's backs. As adults, the dynamics changed a bit. Clara leaned on me for guidance as she navigated university and her early career. She'd call me in tears after bad days or text me to celebrate small wins like acing a teaching exam. I enjoyed being her go-to person, and I always felt a sense of pride in seeing her grow. Jake joined the picture about 8 years ago, and while we were never super close, I respected him for being a steady presence in her life. Over the years, I've done pretty well for myself financially. I started a tech business called Uplink Solutions in my early 20s, and after years of hustle, it finally paid off. I sold it 3 years ago to a larger firm based in San Francisco for a figure that made my head spin. Now I live a comfortable life split between Toronto and a condo I own in Miami. I spend a lot of my time traveling, consulting, and investing in startups I believe in. Claire and Jake, on the other hand, are not in the same boat financially. She's a teacher at an elementary school, and Jake works as a project manager for a local construction company. They're both hardworking people, but they've had to be frugal to save for their wedding. When they announced their engagement 2 years ago, I was thrilled for them. To help, I offered to contribute $10,000 to their wedding as a gift. Clara seemed over the moon about it, and I figured that was that. However, about a month before the wedding, Clara came to me with another request. She and Jake had been dreaming of a honeymoon in the Maldives. Specifically, they wanted to stay at the Sun Eva Yani Resort, one of those places with overwater villas, private butlers, and infinity pools. After all their wedding expenses, they realized they couldn't afford it. So Clara asked me if I could cover the costs. To give you some context, the trip they wanted wasn't just a budget getaway, it was the works. Overwater villa, private chefs, spa treatments, and guided snorkeling excursions. She even showed me the breakdown, and it totaled around $15,000. I was stunned. It wasn't the amount that shocked me, I can technically afford it, but the assumption that I would just say yes because I have money. I told Clara I couldn't do it. She immediately got upset, her tone sharp and accusatory, saying I was being selfish and that $15,000 was nothing to me. She even threw in, "You're rich enough that you probably wouldn't even notice it missing," which made the whole request feel less like a favor and more like an obligation. I reminded her that I'd already gifted her $10,000 for the wedding, but she said that was for the family, not her directly. Jake later texted me, backing Clara up, saying I was being cold and that family helps family. My parents also chimed in, implying that I was being stingy and that Clara deserved a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I stood my ground, but the whole situation left me feeling like a villain at my own sister's wedding. The fallout started almost immediately. The day after the wedding, during brunch at my parents' house in Oakville, Clara was noticeably cold toward me. Anytime I tried to talk to her, she'd respond with curt, one-word answers or simply ignore me altogether. Jake wasn't much better. The two of them stuck to each other like glue and barely acknowledged my presence. At one point, my mom pulled me aside and asked me why I couldn't just look past the money for Clara's sake. "She's your little sister," Mom said. "She's not asking for much, and you're in a position to help. Why wouldn't you want to make her happy?" I tried to explain my perspective. It wasn't about the money itself, it was about the principle. I'd already given her a generous gift. This honeymoon felt like an additional ask that crossed a line. Mom didn't seem to get it, and she left the conversation with a disappointed sigh. Later that week, Clara posted a photo on Instagram of a Maldives sunset, captioned, "Someday. Maybe if dreams come true." It didn't take a genius to read between the lines. Mutual friends started reaching out, asking if something had happened between us. One even joked, "Did you forget to fund your sister's dream honeymoon?" It was mortifying. Adding to the chaos was my best friend, Nate, 35M. Nate and I have been tight since college and he knows my family well. He's the kind of guy who's always ready to give a blunt, unfiltered opinion. When I told him about the situation, he didn't hold back. "Dude, that's insane," he said over beers at a bar in downtown Toronto. "You already gave her $10,000. If that's not enough, then that's on her." Nate has never been one to sugarcoat things, and his support gave me a much-needed boost of confidence. However, Nate's involvement didn't end there. He came with me to a family barbecue that weekend, which turned into a disaster. Clara confronted me directly in front of everyone, saying, "How can you justify holding back when you know how much this meant to us?" Nate jumped in, saying, "He already gave you more than enough. No one owes you a luxury honeymoon." The argument escalated, and soon the entire family was involved. My dad tried to mediate, but my mom ended up crying, saying she hated how money was tearing us apart. Later, Nate told me he felt bad about speaking up so harshly but insisted she needed to hear the truth, even if it stung. His bluntness created even more tension between Clara and me, but at the same time, I couldn't help feeling grateful that someone had my back. The tipping point came when Dad called me. He's usually the neutral one, but even he was on Clara's side. "Look, son," he said, "I get that you're upset about how she approached it, but maybe there's a compromise? You've done so well for yourself, and she's just starting out. It wouldn't kill you to do something nice for her." At this point, I was starting to question myself. Maybe I was being too rigid. Maybe I'd underestimated how much this meant to Clara. But every time I thought about caving, I'd remember the way she'd framed it, like it was something I owed her. That didn't sit right with me. Clara's attitude only grew colder. She stopped replying to my texts entirely, and Jake unfollowed me on all social media. Mutual friends began to distance themselves, likely because they didn't want to be caught in the crossfire. At this point, even casual family dinners became unbearable, with everyone walking on eggshells. The whole situation felt like it was spiraling out of control. Fallout started almost immediately. The day after the wedding, during brunch at my parents' house in Oakville, Clara was noticeably cold toward me. Anytime I tried to talk to her, she'd respond with curt, one-word answers or simply ignore me altogether. Jake wasn't much better. The two of them stuck to each other like glue and barely acknowledged my presence. At one point, my mom pulled me aside and asked me why I couldn't just look past the money for Clara's sake. "She's your little sister," Mom said. "She's not asking for much, and you're in a position to help. Why wouldn't you want to make her happy?" I tried to explain my perspective. It wasn't about the money itself, it was about the principle. I'd already given her a generous gift. This honeymoon felt like an additional ask that crossed a line. Mom didn't seem to get it, and she left the conversation with a disappointed sigh. Later that week, Clara posted a photo on Instagram of a Maldives sunset, captioned, "Someday. Maybe if dreams come true." It didn't take a genius to read between the lines. Mutual friends started reaching out, asking if something had happened between us. One even joked, "Did you forget to fund your sister's dream honeymoon?" It was mortifying. Adding to the chaos was my best friend, Nate, 35M. Nate and I have been tight since college, and he knows my family well. He's the kind of guy who's always ready to give a blunt, unfiltered opinion. When I told him about the situation, he didn't hold back. "Dude, that's insane," he said over beers at a bar in downtown Toronto. "You already gave her $10,000. If that's not enough, then that's on her." Nate has never been one to sugarcoat things, and his support gave me a much-needed boost of confidence. However, Nate's involvement didn't end there. Unbeknownst to me, he decided to post a vague tweet about entitlement ruining families, which quickly gained traction among our mutual connections. This only added fuel to the fire. Clara saw it and immediately assumed it was about her. She texted me in all caps, accusing me of airing our dirty laundry publicly. I confronted Nate about it, and while he apologized, he also said, "Maybe she needs to hear it from someone other than you." The tipping point came when Dad called me. He's usually the neutral one, but even he was on Clara's side. "Look, son," he said, "I get that you're upset about how she approached it, but maybe there's a compromise? You've done so well for yourself, and she's just starting out. It wouldn't kill you to do something nice for her." At this point, I was starting to question myself. Maybe I was being too rigid. Maybe I'd underestimated how much this meant to Clara. But every time I thought about caving, I'd remember the way she'd framed it, like it was something I owed her. That didn't sit right with me. At this point, I was seriously torn. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my sense of fairness and principle. The whole situation had gotten out of hand. I hadn't anticipated the emotional weight this would carry, nor the rift it had created in my family. I kept trying to remind myself that I had done my part. I had helped with the wedding in a meaningful way, and I wasn't just some bottomless bank account. I felt like Clara had lost sight of the gesture, focusing instead on her expectations. Was I being unreasonable? I decided to take a step back. I called a family meeting, not with Clara and Jake, but with my parents. I needed their perspective, without the added emotional charge of Clara and Jake's presence. We met at a local cafe, and I explained my side of things in as level-headed a way as I could manage. "I don't want to fight with anyone," I said. "I just feel like I'm being taken for granted. I've already helped them out with the wedding. That should be enough. This request, it feels like more than just a favor. It feels like an obligation." Mom, as expected, was still on Clara's side. "You know how much Clara has dreamed of this honeymoon. It's the one thing she's been looking forward to, and you're in a position to give her that happiness." Her voice wavered a little, and I could tell it was hard for her to see it any other way. Dad, though, seemed to understand where I was coming from. "I get it," he said, rubbing his temples. "Maybe we've all let the honeymoon idea get out of hand. But I think Clara was just hoping for something extra from you. You've done well for yourself. It's not about the money, it's about showing your sister that you care." That was when it hit me. They were right. Clara was asking for something not because she was entitled, but because in her eyes, it was the ultimate gesture of love from a brother who had always been there for her. It wasn't just about the honeymoon, it was about my relationship with her. If I said no, would I be closing that door? Was this one last opportunity to show her how much I cared? But I still wasn't sure. It felt like I was being asked to buy her love, and that didn't sit well with me. If I gave in now, would she just come back with another grand request next time? That evening, I decided to sleep on it. The next day, I was still undecided. But then, something unexpected happened. Clara reached out to me, not to argue, but to apologize. It was a short text. "Hey, I'm sorry for how I acted. I didn't mean to make you feel like you had to do this for me. I've been really stressed about the wedding and everything. I just wanted this one thing to be perfect." I read the message a few times. It was the first time she'd really acknowledged my feelings in this mess. My instinct was to fire back with something harsh. After all, this whole thing had been such a blow-up. But instead, I took a deep breath and responded, "I appreciate you saying that. I don't want money to come between us. But I also think we need to be honest with each other." The conversation continued, and for the first time since this all started, I felt like we were starting to rebuild some trust. A few weeks have passed since the initial fallout, and I've had a lot of time to think about everything that happened. I won't lie, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. The tension with Clara has lingered, even though the immediate drama died down. But I've been processing things, talking to a few close friends, and reflecting on how I could have handled the situation differently. In hindsight, I realized that I should have been clearer with Clara from the beginning about my boundaries. I didn't communicate just how much her request stung, not just because of the amount of money, but because of the underlying expectation that I should just write a check because I could afford it. She hadn't really considered how I might feel about being asked for such a large sum. And looking back, I think that's where things went wrong. Instead of feeling appreciated, I felt like an ATM with no emotional value attached. After our heart-to-heart over text, Clara and I started texting more regularly. It wasn't instant reconciliation, but it was a start. She apologized for how she approached me, but there were still moments where her frustration would seep through. She would still mention how amazing it would have been to go to the Maldives, but I could tell she wasn't holding it against me anymore. It was like she was grieving the loss of that perfect honeymoon in a way, and that's something I could empathize with. One afternoon, Clara called me. It was the first time since all this mess started that we had a real, open conversation. "Hey, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. I was so caught up in what I wanted that I didn't stop to think about how my request might have come across. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. It was a lot, and it wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling like I was being pressured into something. "I never want you to think I don't care about you, Clara, but there are limits." She took a deep breath. "I get it. And I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed that you'd just say yes. I thought I could guilt you into it, I guess. I was selfish." Her apology was raw and honest, and for the first time, I really felt like she understood my perspective. It didn't change the fact that everything got so ugly, but it was the first step toward mending things. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that I didn't want money to come between us anymore. We agreed to start fresh, to rebuild our relationship slowly but surely. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. I think both of us realized that while money can smooth things over temporarily, it shouldn't be the foundation of family relationships. There was a lot of unspoken tension, and this situation had brought it to the surface. But now, we had an opportunity to work through it. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering sadness. I didn't want to let money dictate the terms of my relationships, but I also felt like I had to protect my own sense of fairness. I wasn't being unreasonable by setting boundaries, and I needed to remind myself of that. A few weeks later, I heard from Clara again. She and Jake had decided to go on a smaller, more affordable trip. They chose a destination within driving distance, a cozy cabin by the lake, and I could sense the excitement in Clara's voice as she told me about it. It wasn't the Maldives, but it was something they could afford, and I could tell that she was happy with the compromise. I congratulated her and told her I was glad they found something that worked for them. I also made sure to express that I was happy for them, genuinely. While I knew the Maldives would have been amazing, this trip sounded like the perfect way for them to make memories without the financial strain. That's when I realized something important. We all had different ideas of what enough meant. For Clara, the Maldives was a symbol of her dream honeymoon. For me, it wasn't about the destination. It was about maintaining a sense of fairness and boundaries. Both of us had to learn that compromise didn't mean settling for less, but respecting each other's positions. Things have been a bit awkward at family gatherings, but there's been no outright tension. Clara and I have been texting more regularly, and I've had a few more heart-to-hearts with my parents. They still don't fully understand my decision, but they respect it. They've backed off, which has been a relief. Jake and I have had some awkward exchanges, but I can tell he's not as angry as he once was. We both know that there's a bigger picture here. Our family dynamic isn't about money, and it never should have been. Looking back on it, I'm glad I stuck to my guns. I could have caved and made a decision that didn't sit right with me, but I didn't. I stood my ground. And while it wasn't easy, I think this was an important lesson for all of us. Family isn't about just throwing money at problems, but about understanding each other and respecting boundaries. So, to answer the question, IA for refusing to pay for my sister's honeymoon even though I'm wealthy? I don't think I am. I'm at peace with my decision now. Yes, it's caused some bumps in the road, but it also opened up a conversation that we needed to have. If anything, it taught me the importance of setting boundaries and making sure that I'm not taken for granted. Family should always come first, but it doesn't mean I should give up my sense of self-respect and fairness. Hey Reddit, I wanted to give you all a quick update on where things stand now that some time has passed. First off, thanks for all the thoughtful responses. Some of you really gave me a new perspective on the situation, especially regarding the guilt trip angle. It's made me reflect even more on what happened and why it was so important to stand my ground. So, here's what's been going on. Clara and Jake's trip. Clara and Jake had their cabin getaway, and I'm genuinely glad it worked out for them. They came back with tons of photos and stories about their time in nature, cooking together, and hiking. Clara actually texted me a few days ago to say how grateful she was for the time away and how refreshing it was to disconnect. I could tell she was much more content with this trip than she would have been with a luxury vacation. Honestly, I think it ended up being more meaningful for them because it was something they could afford, and they didn't feel burdened by financial stress. So, while it wasn't the Maldives, I feel like it worked out for the best. Family dynamics. Things at family gatherings are still a bit weird, but they're improving. My parents and I had a long talk a few weeks ago. They still don't entirely agree with my decision, but they get where I was coming from. My mom even apologized for putting so much pressure on me. She said she didn't realize how much the request had affected me, and that she was sorry for making me feel like I owed them something. That was a relief to hear. There's still some unspoken tension, but we're moving in the right direction. As for Jake, I think he's coming around. We had a few awkward conversations, but he stopped avoiding me. At a family barbecue last weekend, he actually initiated a chat about some work stuff, and we ended up talking for a while. It wasn't deep or personal, but it felt like a step toward mending things. I'm not expecting us to become best friends, but I'm happy things aren't as tense between us. Clara and I have started texting more regularly. We've talked about everything from small things like work to deeper stuff like our childhood memories. It's been nice to reconnect on a more personal level. We're still working through the fallout from everything that happened, but it's a lot more civil now. We haven't had any major arguments, and she's been more understanding of my perspective. I don't think we're 100% there yet, but we're definitely making progress. Final thoughts. Overall, I still stand by my decision. While it wasn't easy, it was necessary for me to set a boundary and make sure that my relationship with Clara didn't turn into a transactional one. It's been tough, but I think it was a wake-up call for all of us about how we handle family dynamics, expectations, and money. Thank you all again for your support. I'm sure there's still some work to be done, but it feels like things are getting back on track, even if slowly.